You ever notice how everyone's got an opinion about your life, except they can't even manage their own? Yeah. Everyone's walking around handing out unsolicited advice like life's a grocery store, and we're all looking for the right brand of existence. Be polite, be humble, be likable, be someone people approve of. It's funny, isn't it? We're told to be ourselves right before being told what ourselves should look like. Well, I've got news for you. The moment you stop caring what people think, the world doesn't collapse, it opens up. You stop performing and start living. You know what's funny? Most people spend their entire lives surrounded by noise and then wonder why they can't hear themselves think. It's like standing next to a jet engine holding a megaphone and asking, why can't I hear my intuition? Because you've buried it, man. You've drowned it under layers of opinions, advice, hashtags, and other people's expectations. You've built a fortress made of noise and then complained that the echo inside sounds confusing. We live in a world that's obsessed with connection but terrified of silence. The moment things get quiet, people panic. They grab their phone, check notifications, scroll, swipe, click, anything to avoid hearing the only voice that actually matters, their own. It's crazy. We'll put more effort into curating our online identity than understanding our inner one. People say, I'm trying to find myself. Really? Try turning off your Wi-Fi first. When you stop caring what people think, something almost magical happens. The volume of the world drops. You start noticing the gaps, the spaces in between the noise, and in those spaces, you start to meet yourself for the first time. Not the version you built to be likable, not the character you play at work or on social media. You, the one who's been whispering for years under all the static. It's a weird experience at first. You start to realize how many of your thoughts weren't even yours. You liked what other people liked. You believed what you were told to believe. You wanted things because everyone else wanted them. It's like waking up and realizing you've been running someone else's race wearing shoes that don't even fit. And the worst part? You thought you were choosing it. Ever watch people panic when their opinions are unpopular? They'll fold faster than a paper airplane in a thunderstorm. Because most folks don't actually have opinions. They rent them. They borrow their beliefs from the crowd and return them when they go out of style. That's not thinking, that's following. But when you stop caring about what the crowd thinks, you start building something solid. Your own judgment, your own instincts, that voice in your gut that says, hey, this doesn't feel right, or you know what, I think I'll take a different road. You finally start hearing that again. And it's not loud. It's not dramatic, it's steady, calm, and real. Let me tell you something. Real thinking doesn't happen in groups. It happens when you're alone, when it's quiet. Some of the smartest, most grounded people I've ever met weren't loud. They were listeners. They listened to themselves. Because the truth doesn't shout, it hums. But most people can't hear the hum because they're too busy shouting their opinions into the void, hoping for likes and validation from strangers who don't even know their middle name. Here's the trick nobody tells you. The human brain is brilliant at reflection, but terrible at multitasking. You can't think clearly if you're always reacting. You can't hear yourself if you're constantly tuned to the world's frequency. The moment you unplug from that, even for a little while, it's like your mind stretches its legs and says, oh, thank God, finally some room in here. You start asking yourself different questions. Not, what will people think if I do this, but what do I think about this? Not, how do I look, but how do I feel? That's the moment everything changes, because most of our anxiety doesn't come from the things we do. It comes from the endless guessing game about how other people might interpret them. When you stop playing that game, you start breathing differently. You start saying no to things that drain you. You start walking away from people who only call you when they need something. You stop dressing for approval and start dressing for comfort. You stop trying to sound smart and start trying to make sense. It's like you rediscover the joy of being human instead of a performance piece. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're at a party. Everyone's talking, laughing, trying to be noticed. You're nodding, pretending to care about conversations that don't matter. Then suddenly, the music cuts out. The room goes quiet. For a second, everyone freezes. You can hear your own breath. That's what it's like when you stop caring what people think. You realize how much noise you were living in. and how good silence actually feels. And the funny part, that silence doesn't just clear your head, it sharpens it. You become more aware, more intuitive, more alive. You notice the small things again. You notice how often people speak out of fear instead of truth. You see how much of society runs on the currency of approval. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. It's like walking out of a theater halfway through a bad movie and realizing you don't have to sit through just because you bought a ticket. You can leave. You can choose something better. You don't owe anyone your silence, your smile, or your compliance. People who truly hear their own thoughts don't live on autopilot. They don't wait for permission to change. They know when something's wrong and they act. They know when something's right and they double down. They're not perfect, but they're real. And that's becoming rarer by the day. You can always spot someone who listens to themselves. They've got this calmness, this grounded energy. They don't flinch when criticized. They don't overreact to praise because they know who they are, and you can't sell them a fake version of themselves. But getting there isn't easy because to hear your own thoughts, you have to go through withdrawal, the withdrawal from validation. You'll feel restless, maybe even lost at first because you're used to being defined by how people see you. But once that noise fades, what replaces it is incredible clarity. It's like cleaning out a cluttered attic and finding treasures you forgot you owned. Old dreams, untouched ideas, pieces of yourself that got buried under years of trying to fit in. You realize how much potential you've been wasting trying to impress people who weren't even paying attention. You start noticing your real voice again, the one that says, I've got something to say and I don't need permission. The one that doesn't care if it's popular, just if it's true. That's where strength comes from. Not from being liked, but from being aligned. And once you find that voice, you guard it with everything you've got. Because the world will try to drown it out again. It'll throw trends, criticism, pressure, fear, all of it, to pull you back into the noise. But once you've heard yourself clearly, you can't unhear it. You start trusting it. You start building around it. That's when life stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like a purpose. Because finally, for the first time, you're not living someone else's script. You're writing your own lines. You ever notice how people love individuality right up until they meet someone who actually has it? They'll say, be yourself. But what they really mean is, be yourself as long as it doesn't make me uncomfortable. The moment you stop asking for permission to exist, the world starts shifting uneasily in its chair. People won't always clap when you grow. Sometimes they'll glare, sometimes they'll whisper, and sometimes they'll walk away. And that's how you know you're onto something real. See, the second you stop living by the rule book of approval, you mess with the system. You're no longer predictable. You stop fitting neatly into the boxes society built to keep everyone well-behaved and manageable. People don't know how to process that. They call you difficult, arrogant, cold, or crazy. But what they're really saying is, you make me uncomfortable because I can't control how you make me feel. That's the thing about freedom. It's contagious but intimidating. Most folks are used to compromise. They've spent years learning to shrink themselves, to fit in, to please, to play along. So when someone walks in the room who doesn't do any of that, who's just unapologetically there, it rattles their foundations. They don't see courage, they see danger, because your authenticity reminds them of their own surrender. There's this idea that nice people never ruffle feathers, that being good means being agreeable. That's nonsense. The most dangerous kind of honesty is quiet confidence. It's not yelling. It's not rebellion for the sake of attention. It's the calm certainty that you don't owe anyone an explanation. People fear that more than aggression, because you can't argue with someone who doesn't need your approval to feel valid. Look at history. Every person who's ever made a real impact started out by scaring the comfortable. People laughed at the Wright brothers, mocked them, told them man wasn't meant to fly. They didn't argue back. They just built the damn plane. Same with Rosa Parks. She didn't shout. She didn't fight. She just sat down and said no. And the world shook. Real courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just refuses to move. When you stop caring what people think, you become unpredictable. And unpredictable people are powerful because you can't be bribed with approval or bullied with shame. That's terrifying to those who rely on those tools to control others. They'll test you at first. They'll gossip, exclude, criticize, and watch how you react. But when you don't flinch, when you stay calm, steady, and unbothered, something shifts. The power balance flips. You ever notice how bullies only pick on people who react? They feed on your fear. But when you don't play their game, when you look them dead in the eye and say nothing, they don't know what to do, because silence scares cowards. Detachment terrifies manipulators. The moment you stop being emotionally available to everyone's opinion, you become a mirror. And when people look at you, they don't see you. They see themselves. That's why they get uncomfortable. You start hearing phrases like, "You've changed." That's their favorite one, as if growth is a betrayal. They don't actually want you to change. They want you to stay predictable, pliable, the same version of you they've already learned to control. When you stop playing your old role, they lose their script. And instead of rewriting it, they call you selfish. But the truth is, self-respect only looks selfish to people who benefited from your lack of it. And let's talk about this idea of being liked. People spend years trying to be universally liked, which is impossible, by the way. You could hand out free gold bars and someone would complain they're too heavy. The goal isn't to be liked, it's to be respected. Because respect doesn't come from conformity, it comes from consistency. The people who once rolled their eyes at you will eventually say, "Damn, they meant what they said." It just takes time. But here's the paradox. Before people respect you, they'll probably fear you a little. Not because you're cruel, but because you're clear. You've got boundaries. You say no without guilt. You don't chase validation. You walk away from nonsense. That's terrifying to anyone who thrives on confusion and control. I remember a story about a guy who worked in a company where everyone stayed late just to impress the boss. He decided to leave on time every day. People called him lazy, uncommitted. But after 6 months, others started doing the same because his indifference exposed their fear. Turns out, nobody actually wanted to stay late. They just didn't want to be judged. His quiet defiance gave everyone else permission to reclaim their lives. That's what happens when you stop caring. You stop obeying unspoken rules, and suddenly people realize the rules were never real. You scare people because you remind them they have a choice. You remind them they could walk away too, that they could stop pretending, that they could live without the constant need for approval. But doing that takes courage, and courage exposes cowardice. It's easier for people to label you weird than admit they've been living half alive. When you reach that point, where you're at peace with yourself and unbothered by judgment, you start to glow differently. You don't need to shout or prove anything. People feel it. They might not like it, but they respect it. You become the calm in the chaos, the anchor in the storm. You scare them not because you're threatening, but because you're stable. And the irony is, once people get over their fear, they start admiring you. They'll ask for your advice. They'll want to know how you do it, how you stay so grounded when everything's falling apart. But they'll never understand that the secret isn't about being strong all the time. It's about no longer giving your energy to things that don't deserve it. That's what's so liberating about not caring what people think. You stop defending yourself for existing. You stop begging for understanding from people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop explaining your dreams to people who've given up on theirs. You stop seeking approval from people you wouldn't even trade places with. And that freedom, it radiates. It makes you magnetic. You attract people who operate on that same wavelength, the ones who don't need you to shrink, who aren't intimidated by your honesty, who don't flinch when you speak your truth. Those are your people. Everyone else is just background noise. The world has enough actors pretending to be what everyone else wants. It doesn't need another clone. It needs people who are unafraid to be disliked, unafraid to stand alone if they have to, unafraid to be real. Because when you're real, you make the fakes nervous. And that's good. Let them be nervous. You scare people when you live freely, because free people remind the enslaved that the cage was never locked. You know what's funny about rejection? Everybody's terrified of it, but nobody realizes it's actually the best filter life ever invented. It's the universe's way of clearing out the noise, wiping off the makeup, and showing you who's real and who's not. But most people don't get that. They see rejection like it's a disease. They'll twist themselves into knots trying to avoid it, like approval is oxygen, and they'll die without it. That's why they never get to the good part, the part where rejection turns into respect. See, the moment you stop caring what people think, you stop performing. And when that happens, some folks will vanish. They'll call you distant, rude, different. But what's really happening is they don't recognize you anymore. They were in love with the character you played, not the person behind it. And when you drop the act, they lose their connection because their connection was fake. It's not a tragedy, it's a cleanse. You're not being abandoned. You're being filtered. People say, it hurts to be rejected. Of course it does. But you know what hurts worse? Living a life full of fake acceptance. Having people clap for a version of you that isn't even real. That's like getting applause for a movie where you're the stunt double. You're in it, but it's not really you. And sooner or later, you get tired of watching someone else's idea of your life on the big screen. When you start being honest about what you believe, what you want, and what you won't tolerate, you start losing people fast. Friends who liked you because you were agreeable disappear. Family members who use guilt as a leash start calling you cold. Coworkers who depended on your silence get nervous because you're finally speaking up. That's the price of authenticity, but it's also the down payment on your freedom. You'll notice something interesting when you go through that stage. At first, rejection feels personal. You think, what did I do wrong? But then, if you pay attention, you realize it's not about you at all. It's about how your growth exposes their comfort. People don't reject you because you're wrong. They reject you because your courage reminds them they settled. You're holding up a mirror they don't want to look into, so they push you away before they have to face themselves. You can tell a lot about a person by how they respond to your boundaries. The right ones respect them. The wrong ones resent them. Rejection just helps you tell the difference. It's not punishment, it's information. It's life's way of whispering they're not meant for your next chapter. It's like pruning a tree. You cut off the dead branches so the healthy ones can grow stronger. But we treat rejection like losing leaves in autumn, crying over what's gone instead of realizing we're making room for spring. Every no that stings in the moment is secretly a door closing so something more aligned can walk in. And here's the twist. Once you go through enough rejection, you stop fearing it because you start seeing the pattern. Every rejection that once made you question your worth eventually leads to something better. The job that didn't hire you makes space for the one that fits perfectly. The person who ghosted you makes room for someone who actually sees you. The group that kicked you out frees you to build your own table. Over time, you start realizing rejection isn't loss, it's direction. But let's be honest, that middle part is rough. The gap between losing approval and gaining respect feels lonely as hell. You walk through that space wondering if you made a mistake. You look around and it's quiet. Nobody's cheering, nobody's texting. That's the stage where most people turn back because silence feels like failure when you're used to noise. But if you hold your ground long enough, something changes. That same silence starts to feel peaceful. That same isolation starts to feel empowering. Because you realize you don't need a crowd to validate your value. You start standing taller, speaking slower, thinking clearer. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't listening. That's when respect sneaks in quietly, like morning light after a long night. People start noticing. The same ones who rolled their eyes at you begin to pay attention. They see you didn't crumble without their approval. You didn't chase, you didn't beg, you didn't break. You stayed solid. And that's when something interesting happens. They stop judging you and start respecting you. Maybe they don't admit it, but they feel it. Because deep down, everyone respects the person who didn't flinch under pressure. Respect doesn't show up with applause, it shows up with silence. It's when people stop interrupting you mid-sentence. It's when they start watching how you move. It's when they start asking for your opinion, not to argue, but to understand. Respect arrives when you're too busy living your truth to go looking for it. You ever notice how people love underdogs until the underdog stops acting desperate? They liked you better when you needed them, when you said yes to everything, when you smiled through disrespect. But when you stop needing approval, they don't know where to put you. You're not controllable anymore. You're free, and that makes them nervous. But eventually, the real ones come back around. The ones who used to roll their eyes start calling you brave. The ones who dismissed you start quoting you. The ones who left start wishing they hadn't. Because the truth is, people don't respect those who please everyone. They respect those who please their conscience. Rejection strips away the fluff. It removes the spectators and leaves you with supporters. It filters out the noise and leaves you with clarity. You stop chasing validation and start attracting alignment. And when that happens, you'll look back and realize that every person who left did you a favor. They made space for better ones to find you. There's something magnetic about someone who's been rejected and didn't shrink. You can feel it in their presence. They don't need to prove anything. They've been burned, doubted, abandoned, and yet they walk with quiet certainty. That's what real confidence looks like. Not loud, not showy, just unshakable. You'll find that once you stop begging for seats at other people's tables, you start building your own. And when you build your own, the same people who rejected you might come knocking, asking for a seat. And that's the moment you understand the cycle. Rejection isn't the end, it's the audition for respect, because respect doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from standing tall after you've been pushed down. It comes from being consistent when it would have been easier to quit. It comes from refusing to shrink yourself just to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. Rejection carves out the parts of you that were never meant to stay hidden. It toughens your skin, but softens your heart. It humbles your ego, but strengthens your soul. So when people reject you, let them. Don't chase, don't beg, don't argue, just keep walking. Because the path of rejection is paved with lessons that lead straight to self-respect. And sooner or later, that self-respect turns into their respect. You don't need to be understood to be respected. You just need to be real long enough for the truth to reveal itself. And when it does, you'll realize that every rejection you ever faced wasn't pushing you away. It was pushing you forward. You know, when people say, don't be so stubborn, what they really mean is stop thinking for yourself so I can control you again. The moment you stop caring what others think, you start becoming something most of the world isn't prepared to handle. Untouchable. Not in the superhero sense, not in the ego-driven I'm better than everyone kind of way, but in the most powerful sense of all, you can't be manipulated. You become dangerous, and not because you threaten anyone, but because you can't be bought, shamed, or bent out of shape by pressure. You stop being a puppet in a world that runs on strings. See, society doesn't really know what to do with people it can't control. Most of the systems we live in, work, politics, media, even relationships, they all rely on your need to be liked, needed, accepted, or rewarded. That's the hook. That's how they keep you in line. They dangle approval like bait. Do this, and we'll love you. Think that, and we'll include you. Obey quietly, and we'll keep you comfortable. And for most people, that's enough. Comfort is a powerful drug. They'll trade their voice for peace and their truth for applause. But when you stop caring about those things, when you start thinking, wait a second, I don't need your stamp of approval to be valid, the whole system starts glitching. People don't realize how much of their life is controlled by invisible strings. Your job depends on your willingness to play politics. Your relationships depend on your ability to suppress honesty. Your self-image depends on how many people click a heart on your photo. That's not living. That's negotiating your worth every single day. And it's exhausting. You don't even notice how much control you've given away until one day you say no, and the room goes silent. That's when you see it. The power you gave them was always yours. The dangerous ones, the unmanipulatable ones, they don't react to guilt. They don't flinch at criticism, and they don't chase praise. You can't emotionally blackmail them with lines like "you've changed" or "you owe me." They'll look you in the eye and say, "You're right, I've changed, and I don't owe you anything." That's when people back off, because deep down, manipulators only thrive where fear exists. Take away fear and they've got nothing left. And make no mistake, the world loves fear. It's built entire industries around it. Advertising, religion, politics, entertainment. They all run on one simple message: you're not enough, but we can fix that for you. Buy this, vote for that, believe in this, follow them. All of it designed to make you dependent on something outside yourself. And when you stop believing that lie, when you say, "Actually, I'm fine as I am," you become the scariest kind of person there is. Self-sufficient. Being unmanipulatable doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop letting them control how you feel about yourself. It means when someone tries to guilt you, you recognize it for what it is, a trap. When someone flatters you too much, you see the hook behind the compliment. When someone tries to pressure you, you recognize it's their fear talking, not your responsibility to soothe it. It's a level of awareness most people never reach because they're too afraid of losing approval to see how often it's used as a leash. You can tell when someone's free by how they respond to nonsense. When you're manipulatable, every insult feels like an attack. Every compliment feels like validation. Every disagreement feels like rejection. But when you've reclaimed your sense of self, you stop dancing to that rhythm. Someone insults you, you shrug. Someone praises you, you smile, but you don't start performing. Because both are just opinions, and opinions don't change your truth. That's dangerous. Because you've just removed the emotional currency people trade with. Think about it. How many people stay in bad jobs because they're afraid of what others will think if they quit? How many stay in toxic relationships because they don't want to be judged? How many stay silent in a room full of lies because they don't want to be labeled difficult? That's manipulation disguised as belonging. The price of belonging shouldn't be your peace, but that's the exchange most people make without even realizing it. When you stop making it, when you choose honesty over harmony, people will test you. They'll push your buttons, trying to find the old version of you, the one who apologized too quickly, the one who second-guessed everything, the one who said yes just to avoid conflict. And when they can't find that version anymore, that's when they start respecting you, even if they won't admit it. The truth is, freedom makes people uncomfortable. It reminds them that they could be free too, if only they stopped caring what others thought. But most people would rather live comfortably in a cage than risk the open air of self-trust. You can see it everywhere, in boardrooms, classrooms, even families. People quietly shrinking to fit into spaces they've outgrown, because standing tall might make someone else uneasy. When you stop doing that, you expose the whole game. You reveal how much of this world depends on polite compliance. That's why being unmanipulatable is such a threat. Because it's not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It's clarity, it's peace, it's the kind of calm that can't be purchased or faked. You don't need to argue, you don't need to prove, you don't even need to resist. You just stop playing. And the second you stop playing, everyone who relied on your compliance loses their grip. You become dangerous because your happiness can't be traded. Your confidence can't be inflated or deflated by others' opinions. You're no longer a participant in emotional economies that reward insecurity. You don't need to manipulate others to get what you want, because you don't need anything from them to feel whole. That's power, quiet, unshakable power. And here's the thing, people can feel that energy. They may not understand it, but they sense it. They talk differently around you. They hesitate before trying to push your boundaries, not because you're intimidating, but because you're solid. You're not reactive. You don't swing with the tide of public opinion. You're rooted, grounded, still. And in a world addicted to chaos, stillness looks like rebellion. But the best part? Once you become unmanipulatable, you stop needing to manipulate others too. You stop playing games, you stop guilt-tripping, convincing, performing. You give people the same freedom you gave yourself to think, to choose, to walk away. You realize that control was never connection. That fear was never love. And that honesty, even when it's inconvenient, is the only real currency worth spending. So yeah, you become dangerous. Dangerous to systems built on insecurity. Dangerous to people who thrive on confusion. Dangerous to anyone who needs your compliance to feel powerful. But to those who value truth, to those who crave something real, you become magnetic. You become the kind of person others quietly admire, not because you're perfect, but because you're free. And freedom, once you've tasted it, is impossible to give up. Once you've learned that your peace isn't up for negotiation, no amount of approval can tempt you back into chains. Once you've realized that being liked is temporary, but being authentic is eternal, you stop caring about fitting in altogether. You walk differently. You speak differently. You live differently. Because once you're no longer controlled by guilt, fear, or praise, nobody owns you. And that, in a world built on control, is the most dangerous thing you can ever be, your own person. You ever notice how everyone's acting lately? Not living, acting. Like life has become one giant audition, and everyone's fighting for the role of socially acceptable human being. You see it everywhere. People rehearsing smiles, memorizing opinions, posting highlights like movie trailers for lives they're not even sure they enjoy. We've become performers in a play nobody asked for. And the stage, it's everywhere. Your job, your friendships, your relationships, your social media feed. Everyone pretending they're happy, confident, successful, or enlightened, while quietly wondering if anyone else feels as fake as they do. And it's exhausting, isn't it? Pretending, performing, managing the image of who you think you should be instead of actually being. You spend years doing what you think will make people clap, and then one day you realize the applause never comes. Or worse, it does, and it doesn't mean a damn thing. Because the truth is, applause feels good for about 5 seconds. Then you're back to the same emptiness you were trying to cover up. You start wondering, who am I doing all this for? That's when something cracks open inside you. That's when you start seeing the difference between living and performing. See, performance is external. It's all about perception. You dress for it, you speak for it, you filter for it. Living, though, that's internal. It's raw, it's unpolished, it's unpredictable. When you're living, you don't need an audience. You don't need to curate your feelings into something digestible. You just exist, fully, messily, honestly. And that's terrifying to people who've spent their whole lives performing, because realness can't be controlled. It doesn't always look pretty. It doesn't fit neatly into the good person or cool person box. It's human. And being human, actually being human, is the most rebellious act in a world obsessed with image. The crazy part is most of us start performing young. You cry as a kid and someone says, stop crying, be strong. You laugh too loud and they say, be quiet, behave. You get told, don't be weird, don't be different, don't stand out. So you start adjusting, trimming, softening. You build a character, a version of yourself that's easier to digest. Maybe it's the nice one. Maybe it's the funny one. Maybe it's the smart one. Whatever gets the approval. But every time you play that role, a little part of you goes missing. You start confusing acceptance with love. You start mistaking performance for purpose. I knew a guy once who had the perfect resume. Great job, beautiful house, nice car, big smile. He'd post pictures of vacations, anniversaries, motivational quotes, the whole I've got it all figured out package. Then one night we were sitting on his porch and he said, you know what's funny? I've never felt more lost in my life. That hit me because I knew he wasn't lying. He was performing so well that everyone thought he was living his dream, but inside he was empty. That's what happens when your identity depends on applause. The second the audience goes home, the silence becomes unbearable. Living, real living, doesn't require an audience. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't even need explanation. It just needs presence. When you stop performing, you start noticing things, small things, like the way coffee smells before the day begins, or how good it feels to laugh at something stupid without worrying if it's cool. You start doing things because you enjoy them, not because they'll make a good post. You wear what feels comfortable instead of what looks trendy. You talk because you have something to say, not because silence feels awkward. You start feeling again, and not just the good feelings, the uncomfortable ones too, the ones you used to bury under performance. But even those start to feel like freedom, because at least they're real. When you live, you stop negotiating your worth. You stop trying to prove that you deserve space, success, or love. You realize you don't need to earn your existence through productivity or popularity. You just exist, and that's enough. That's when life starts to slow down. You stop rushing to be someone you already are. And that realization, as simple as it sounds, can change everything. Because once you stop performing for others, you start showing up for yourself. But don't expect everyone to like this new version of you. When you stop performing, some people will panic. They like the character you played, the agreeable one, the easy one, the one who always made them feel comfortable. The real you might make them uncomfortable, because authenticity always does. It's unpredictable. It challenges others to look at their own masks, and most people aren't ready for that. So they'll call you selfish, distant, arrogant, or different. Let them. Because for the first time, their opinion won't dictate your behavior. You'll be too busy living. Living means you start saying no, not because you're rude, but because you finally value your time. It means you start taking risks, not because you're reckless, but because you're alive. It means you start loving without conditions, forgiving without performance, laughing without an audience. You stop being the edited version of yourself and start embracing the whole unfiltered story, the messy parts, the mistakes, the contradictions, all of it. Because that's where the real beauty is. That's where you actually connect with people. We've been sold this lie that perfection is admirable. It's not. It's boring. Nobody relates to perfect. People relate to honesty. They relate to struggle, vulnerability, humor, awkwardness, the things we've been trained to hide. You ever notice how you feel closest to someone after they stop pretending? That's because truth builds connection, not performance. And once you experience that kind of real connection, you'll never want to go back to the fake stuff again. The irony is, when you stop performing, life actually gets richer. You attract better people, not because you changed, but because you're no longer pretending. You start seeing opportunities you never saw before because you're finally paying attention to what you want, not what others expect. You find joy in the smallest, simplest things, and the stress of keeping up appearances, gone. You don't have to remember the script anymore. You don't have to monitor your image. You can breathe again. And that's the essence of living. Breathing without fear, acting without calculation, speaking without rehearsal. You'll still mess up, you'll still get hurt, but it'll be yours. Your life, your story, your truth, and that's worth more than any applause you could ever get. Because when the curtain finally falls, and it will for all of us, nobody's going to remember the performance. They'll remember the moments you were real, the times you laughed without posing, loved without performing, and lived without pretending. That's the legacy of someone who truly lived, not perfectly, but honestly. So stop rehearsing for a part you never auditioned for. The show's over, the spotlight's off. Step off the stage, walk into your own damn life, and start living it. Not for them, not for the claps, not for the camera, for you. Because the truth is, the world doesn't need another performer. It needs more people who are actually alive. So what happens if you stop caring what people think? You stop being a mirror and start being a light. You'll lose a few faces in the crowd, but gain the one that matters, your own. And once you see it clearly, you'll wonder why you ever gave a damn what the others thought in the first place. Because the truth is, they're too busy worrying what you think of them.